Hello and welcome to this webcast as part of the Single Sales Principles series from Lamore Consulting. In this webcast, we're going to start to look at things a little bit differently. We're moving away from the single sales principle itself, which was covered in a lot of detail in the first 6 months of this year, 2016. And you can see all of those videos, obviously, in the archive as well. This is a slight change to the series because we're going to look at some of the formal professional qualifications that can be achieved in sales, which are great qualifications to have in themselves, but the underlying material that you need to go through for the qualifications is in itself very useful too. The material that I'm going to go through in this webcast relates to what is called Unit 503, and it's actually to do with Learning Outcome 1 and the first part of Learning Outcome 1 in Unit 503. If you're not sure what those are, don't worry about it, or Google it, or give us a call, and we can talk to you about the professional qualifications a little bit further. So the link here is with Unit 503, and it's looking at sales forecasting. Sales forecasting is one of those areas that, to be honest, in my experience, I have yet to come across salespeople who really enjoy forecasting. It's one of those things that is either viewed as a triviality and unimportant and I just rush it through, or it can be viewed as a motivational thing where we set a great target and we need to look incredibly positively at what can be achieved. It can be looked at something that is hugely complicated and requires lots of numbers and work and that sort of stuff, and people don't want to get involved in that either. Or it can simply be something that is an added hassle and we don't really see the value of it. Now, the reality is that forecasting is a really important part of a sales role, and in any business, being able to forecast accurately will enable you to grow more successfully, to deliver better to your customers, to be able to minimize costs of the operation and therefore drive costs down or increase profitability. There are loads and loads of really good reasons why we should focus on becoming much better at forecasting. But it is still a bit of a combination of science and art to get forecasting right. So in this unit, we're going to actually look at how we can approach forecasting future trends in businesses. Unfortunately, none of us have a crystal ball. If we did, there would be no point in having this particular webcast because you'd know what the future was going to be anyway. And to be honest, you probably wouldn't be doing sales forecasting. You'd forecast what the lottery numbers were going to be and then retire. Life isn't like that. We don't have the opportunity to look in a crystal ball. So we do actually need to think, how can we understand what the future may hold for us? So there are a number of different ways of doing this. I'm going to look really at two key ways. The first is the numeric aspect, looking at it from what we call a quantitative basis, looking at the numbers and seeing what they can actually tell us about it. I'm going to touch towards the end of this webcast on the qualitative side as well. The idea that it's not just all about the numbers, we need to get a broader range of information in there if we're going to produce a good forecast to start with. So let's have a little look at what we mean in terms of forecasting future trends. There are a number of ways of looking at it, and one of the key things to do is to actually step back and look at the data that we've already got. It's a great starting point to have. Let us see what's happened over the last 6 months, the last year, the last 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, basically as much data as we've got. The past does not tell us what the future is going to look like. As you get on all of the sort of banking and financial adverts, the past is not an indication of what will happen in the future. However, it does give us a bit of a steer in reality. We can look at what's happened in the past and see whether we can infer any particular patterns that might help us look in terms of what's going to happen in the future. So I'm going to take you through 3 different approaches to doing that. The data that you see on the screen behind me now is the growth in UK life expectancy. And we call this a linear trend because you can almost see a dead straight line going across the chart that enables you to say, well, do you know what? We could have a pretty good forecast of what's going to happen the year after, the year after, and the year after. Without any additional information, without any additional data, it would be a fair assumption to say that that pattern is going to continue because it has been moving in the same way, in the same stable fashion for a prolonged period of time. So unless we've got information or data to the contrary, our forecast would simply be a continuation of this linear trend that you see. Other areas are not quite as straightforward as that. The next one to have a look at is what we call exponential trends. This is where instead of having a straight line, you actually have a steepening line, where something is starting to grow, but every year it's growing more rapidly than it did in the prior period. Something like internet usage would be something like that. It is growing and has been growing exponentially. The danger with this is that we can't really realistically assume exponential growth is going to continue ad infinitum into the future forever. And the reason for that is it will then reach some sort of limit. UK internet usage now is probably not growing exponentially anymore, because if we were consistently adding 50% and 50% and 50% on, we would very, very quickly get to everybody. And it's got to finish somewhere. It's got to start leveling off and tailing off at some point. In the time frame that we've got here, it hasn't reached that point of tailing off, but we need to be careful when we're looking into the future to see if it is going to tail off, when do we think it's going to tail off, what is the market capacity. So that's how we look at exponential trends. The next one to have a look at is perhaps a more realistic one for most businesses. This is where we have polynomial trends, where we have data points that go up and down and up and down and up and down, and we're never quite sure which direction they're going to move in next and those sort of things. Now, this one on here, you can start to see some sort of pattern in here. This is actually UK energy consumption data that I've brought into the chart here. And you can see that there is some sort of shape. The spikes are relatively regular, and the dips are relatively regular as well. And if you did a really straightforward curved line to smooth out those, something that we call a moving average. I've done a 4-period moving average here. We take out those peaks and troughs, which are quarterly, and obviously in winter we tend to use a lot more energy than we do in the summer, and it starts to smooth out the line a bit. Now, moving average is one way of doing it. If you use Excel or those sort of pieces of software that enable you to analyze data, you've got loads and loads of choices. The other one that's really handy is what is actually called the polynomial trend. And you can set that to have however many peaks and troughs across the period that you want to have. And by doing that, what you can actually do is say, what is the overarching underlying pattern of this particular piece of data? And what we can see on the chart behind me is that it's been flattish for about the first half of the chart, then started to take a dip, and then started to flatten out a little bit more. There are two really important things to remember when we're looking at data like this. We can play with it in lots of ways. We don't want to get bogged down in it because we're not statisticians. That's not the purpose of our job. But the purpose of our job is to say, what is it likely to be like in the future? And we need to reflect both elements of this. What is happening in terms of the underlying trend in the business? And then if we have a seasonal business like energy consumption, perhaps if you work in the umbrella market or the ice cream market, clothing markets for particular ranges would work like this. We will see these seasonal trends as well. And the more we can separate those out and understand what is being driven by seasonal trends, what is being driven by underlying patterns in the business, the more accurate our forecast is going to be for the future. So, one of the first things to do is to actually think about the market that you operate in. Is it a steadily growing incremental market and therefore is better represented by some sort of linear growth pattern? Is it a flat market? Is it linear but actually not growing at all? Is it linear but declining? Are you in an exponential market where growth rates are consistently getting higher and higher and higher? If that's the case, fantastic, as long as you can keep up with demand on there, but do bear in mind there will come a point at which that will stop, and we need to be a little bit careful about that. And the third one, and the more frequent one, is do we have seasonal patterns in our business? Do we have natural fluctuations and ups and downs? And how do we go about stripping out stuff like seasonality that will affect things on a regular basis versus what is happening as an underlying trend in the market? And there are lots and lots of tools, really simple tools in Excel that are available to enable you to do that. They'll effectively do the work for you, and that's great. The next thing then to look at is, because we can't just look at the past, we have to go and look into the future. The future is not going to be exactly the same as the past in pretty much any market you operate in. So there are 3 key areas that it's worth exploring when you're actually looking at what is going to happen in the future, on top of your basic trend that is an extrapolation from what has happened in the past. The first one of these is to look at the market itself. What is happening in the marketplace overall? Are you in a declining market? Are you in a growing market? Are you in a stable market? Are there any substitutes that are on the horizon that might cause a significant change to the type of market that you're in? Or are there new regulations and laws coming in that are actually going to change the use of your product, change the use of your services that will enable you to operate differently or restrict the way in which you operate? So have a look at the market overall. What is happening not just to your numbers and your business, but the overall market as well. The second thing is to look at competition. What is happening in terms of your competitors' activities? Are they growing? Are they innovating more quickly than you? Or actually are they starting to lag behind and you've got the opportunity to grow your market share, perhaps in a growing market, and maybe access a little bit of that more exponential growth than the traditional linear growth that you might have seen. And then we need to look at other factors as well. I've mentioned a few in terms of legal stuff and regulatory stuff, but there may be 1,000,001 other factors that could affect things. Don't go into 1,000,001 factors and 1,000,001 pieces of detail about it, because we'll be here forever and we're still playing a guessing game when we're looking into the future. But just cast your eye over other things that may affect your business, that you think, do you know what, if this happens, we might need to factor that in to the forecast that we put forward to the business. Because of that, and because we have this level of uncertainty, if we want to go to the next level of forecasting to say, what if, and start to answer those questions, there are other ways that we need to address that. The first is to make sure that we can actually calculate different forecasts. So scenarios are a really good way of looking at that. What if this particular big change happens? What would happen in the marketplace if that were to take place? If it doesn't happen, what would happen in that marketplace now? And we might end up with 2 or 3 different forecasts based on some assumptions that we've got. And as long as we're really clear about the assumptions that we've put in to our forecast, at least as soon as we get data that enables us to see whether that assumption is going to come true or not, we actually stand a good chance of being able to revise our forecast accurately and keep on top of it as the year goes by. And then the final point on here, just something to bear in mind when we're creating a forecast, is a forecast is not either a target. It's not about putting the biggest number in there that you can find in order to look really good and get the prestige of having the potential biggest business next year. Have targets by all means, but they're for a different purpose. Forecasting is to enable us to run the business effectively. Equally, don't go the other way. Don't under-forecast. There is always the temptation to under-forecast and therefore over-deliver. Look, aren't I great? I've over-delivered. That might work in the short term. You might be able to get away with it in the short term. But the reality is, if everybody is taking this approach of under-forecasting, we're not going to have enough stock in the business. We're going to go out of stock because we're not making enough or importing enough or generating enough stuff of the product. We don't have the resources available to provide the services that we need because we've under-forecast. So be realistic, be sensible with your forecasting. So the 2 broad approaches that we've got are basically the quantitative stuff and what I'm now going to talk about very briefly, which is the qualitative stuff. Both are really valid. It's great to have a combination of the two, and the qualitative stuff is basically going out and asking people questions. We can go out and find from market research, from data that is out there, what people are thinking of buying, what people are thinking of doing, what their plans are going to be, what changes they might be putting into their lives and those sort of things in the future, other people's guesswork. But we can also use what's called the Delphi technique. And the Delphi technique is not about going out to random strangers in the street or even doing research into our known market. It's using the expertise that we have within our industries and within our businesses to say, okay, let's put some scenarios forward and let's come out with a forecast for the year. Everybody then submits their forecast for the year and you have a discussion around it. Why do you think it's going to be this number? Why do you think it's going to be that number? And so on. And once that discussion's been had, everybody can go away again and reforecast their numbers, take into account the things that they think would be more valid and discard the ones that they put into their original one or they heard from somebody else that they think is going to be less valid. You then reconvene, you have a look at everybody's forecast and everybody's assumptions again, and then if necessary, go away and then come back, go away and come back until you get to a consensus opinion. Now, the best thing about this is you are genuinely taking in lots of people's views about things, and through a process of Socratic questioning and a Socratic exercise in diving into, well, what if I accept this piece of data? What if I reject this piece of data? Hopefully we get towards some sort of sensible conclusion. The key benefit of this is we get shared ideas. So, very brief introduction to forecasting. We will be following up on the other areas of sales forecasting within this ISMM Unit 503 in future webcasts. If you want us to look at anything in particular, do just drop us an email and let us know. But in the meantime, have fun with your sales forecasts. Make sure you revise them as the year goes by. And if you've got any interesting stories about those, we'd love to hear those as well. Thank you very much.